Hey everybody, welcome. How you doing? Ah, it's like Angelina's on, welcome. And we're gonna have a wonderful talk tonight. And I think that in lieu of the holiday, I want to talk about death. And I want to talk about death in a way of not only coping with a loss, but I want to talk about death in helping another in supporting them. Before I even begin, I want to say that you could go online and you could read scholarly journal articles, and you have the highest degree in psychiatry. And while all of those help, right? They all do. They all really do help. There is nothing that can ever support the loss of a loved one. And while, as people of the old faith, we realize that they are in another realm. Their physical presence is no longer here. Now, while others might be able to walk the path of the beyond in whatever pantheon that might be and whatever structure that might be, still there is the inevitable loss. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight, so I hope you like it, and I hope you enjoy tonight's talk. My name is Druid Clan, founder of the Druid Circle, founder of the Druid Order of Blessed Stone and Wood, and founder of Druid University, along with Druid Living, a conservative pagan media outlet. Let's begin with the Druid's Creed. So, just to give you a little point of reference, this is the creed that, let me just bring this up a little bit, guys. Sorry about that. All right. This is the creed that I wrote from Christian D. Larson's Optimist Creed, but I changed it to fit what I believe the Druids would have believed. I promise the kindred, the folk of the Druidhood, and myself, to be so strong that nothing can disturb my peace of mind, to talk health, happiness, and prosperity to every living person I meet, to make all my friends feel that there is something worthwhile in them, to look at the sunny side of everything and make my optimism come true, to ponder only of the best, to work only for the best, and to expect only the best, to stand just as enthusiastic about the success of others as I am about my own, to forget the mistakes of the past and press on to the greater achievements of the future, to wear a cheerful countenance at all times and give every living creature I meet a smile, to exist too large for worry, too noble for anger, too strong for fear, and too happy to permit the presence of trouble, to think well of myself and to proclaim this fact to the world, not only in loud word but also in great deed, to live in the faith that the whole world is on my side so long as I am true to the best that is in me, to honor my procrastination not as an excuse for due time, but as waiting on the right time to execute action from virtue, to know that my heart, soul, mind, and spirit, my Druidic tetrachonomy, are in sync with kindred only when I am genuine with their comprehensive truth, to abide unmovable in my ethics of worshiping God, doing all good, and remaining brave against those who oppose me and steadfast with those who support me, to grasp excellence as mastering a concept, not by knowing few ideas of many subjects, but by comprehending and practicing many ideas, creating the sum of that subject. Girawen. So, I guess I want to start with a definition of grief. And since it's Memorial Day, would like to say Happy Memorial Day. And even though it's a celebration where many of us are cooking out and having a wonderful weekend here in the States, I would still say that there are people who are experiencing loss. And while this is Memorial Day weekend, we're going to highlight those who have been lost to defend the geographic boundary in which they reside and live. So grief, and my definition is just basically that it is a reaction to loss. It is a reaction to loss, right? So it technically isn't necessarily a feeling as much as it is a process. And when we lose someone, we go through that process, right? We go through the process of knowing that eventually that pain will come to an end. And I think especially for Memorial Day weekend, and thinking about all of those graves that are lined up, with the American flag and the white, the white stone, I think that it's important that we understand that it is a process. It's a process for those coping, and it's a process for those supporting. And I want to talk about both tonight. While I'll be highlighting more of the coping, I'm also going to talk about supporting. And the reason why I'm going to talk about both is because while I know what it's like to experience the loss of someone who I was very close to, we don't experience an experience or never experience an experience that another experienced. And that's why it's so crucial and critical for us to think about the design, the process of which we need to go through. And we're going to talk about that tonight in Serene Sunday, Coping with Grief and Supporting the Griever. A couple things I want to say. Number one, that, and these are just some thoughts that I have, there are no time limits for this grueling process, right? There's no time limits. Time doesn't exist. And this process is something that you cannot ignore, right? You must come face to face with it. And even in the creed we talk about strength, right? And courage and vision and wisdom. But in this case, strength doesn't necessarily mean, can you go without crying? Can you go without feeling? But strength is the ability to come and know the process of this. And not crying doesn't mean that you aren't in pain. It just means you're still going to experience that pain, but you're going to experience that pain in another way. And you're going to vent that pain in another way. And we're going to talk about all of this tonight. So, you will never forget the loss, and it's never going to happen. You're never going to forget the loss. I mean, there's going to be days where you go without thinking about it, but it will always be present. And that's important, because while the life that you've once known, that Druidic tetrachronomy of heart and soul and mind and spirit, if not even more than those four, but at least those four, that once inhabited a body, and that body of which you knew and loved is now gone, it doesn't mean that that soul hasn't transmigrated. It doesn't mean that that soul is, or and when I say soul, you know what I mean, the Druidic Tetrachronomy, the DT. It doesn't mean that that soul has the energy has stopped, right? It keeps going, it keeps moving, it keeps living, and it still has its being, right? But eventually, even though you won't forget it, you will eventually come to accept it. You know, Kubler-Ross is R-O-S-S with the umlaut over the U, which is the two dots, right? The umlaut. Kubler-Ross says that there are these 5 stages of grief, right? I'm going to read them off to you according to the stages of grief, right? But even though there's 5, I still think that there's really 4, and the final is actually the overcoming, the winning, the gaining of the trophy, right? You know, and you know, it's been once said that that the trophy is simply the icing on the cake, not the cake itself, right? The cake itself is the duration. The cake itself is the pain and the energy that it puts, and all of that it goes into the mixing and the exact measurements, the exacting and the excellence that comes out of that, right? The icing on the cake is simply the trophy. And in this case, the icing on the cake of those 5 steps is simply acceptance. That's the icing on the cake. The cake itself is these 4 steps that Kubler explains. Number 1, denial. You know? And that's fairly easy to understand. Not go through. None of these are easy to go through. And then after denying that the loss has taken place, we enter into this anger period, right? And that after the anger of this loss, then we enter into a bargaining sort of stage, a bidding, if you will, with the gods, you know, and others, you know, anything to get that life form back into its body, back and return to you. And finally, depression. And understand that this depression, while it is a step, okay, it is different than that general over, you know, that generalized depression, that depression that we all, you know, that we all understand and know that either we have lived and suffered, or that others have lived and suffered. And so that is the cake, right? That's not the icing on the cake. It's the cake. It's making it. It's thinking about it. It's putting your heart, your soul, your mind, spirit into that. All for the sake that not only is it pleasing to you, that it also is pleasing to the one you bake it for. And so the acceptance is that last phase that we go through in knowing that person's death. You know, I think that a lot of people would say, well, why are we talking about death now, and why is Memorial Day now? Why wouldn't it be during, Samhain, or Halloween? Why wouldn't it be during then? Why is it now, right? And the day itself could have been picked for a number of reasons. There could have been many reasons why we picked this day. But I think it does very well work with I think it works very well with Beltane. I think it does. And the reason why I think it works with Beltane is because Beltane is that time of purgatory, right? That purging, right? While many people, in the neo-pagan community would think about the idea that, oh no, it's only about having sex. It's only about copulating, right? The maypole, right, is about, that whole idea of celebrating masculinity, and then dancing around it is that circle, right? That not that straight rigid line, but that circle, right? And that femininity and how it's in balance with one another. But I think that there's other things that so many people forget, and that's what happens with indoctrination. That's what happens when we begin to simply just read from one writer, or read from one author, or read from one publication. We forget that there are other things out there that Beltane celebrates. And while it isn't necessarily death that it celebrates, it's that purging, that going through the fires, preparing yourself for something, right? It's the idea of preparing yourself for battle, perhaps even the wild hunt. But it still is a preparation, right? And you're preparing yourself for the greatest feeling of all, relief. And so I don't think there could have been a more appropriate day than to have Memorial Day on the day on a day in May, because I think it is incredibly appropriate. We come about loss. We come about loss either by experiencing it, or by notification. We could experience loss ourselves. We can, see it happen in front of us, or suddenly one day there's a call. And, I want to talk a little bit about memory, because not only is memory important here, and understanding how it comes into play in all of these trials and tribulations that we go through, but I think it's also important that we understand that there is something about it that we must commit to memory. When I was younger, back in the 70s, when I was younger, every Memorial Day weekend, we were probably out, but for some reason it was always Jaws, the movie, right? And there couldn't be a more appropriate movie there couldn't be a more appropriate movie for Memorial Day, I don't think, anyway. I think that Jaws is so much of an important movie, right? Because the predator, the shark in all of this is that death, right? That you either that you experience it or you've been notified. But Jaws is really more about the spirit that arises out of loss. When we were younger, we would be able to recite word by word these movies that we would watch over and over again after being taught it and having committed it to our memory. I think that we would remember everything. And there's a scene in Jaws that I think is fairly important. And I want you guys to listen to this because I think that you'll enjoy it. So they're on the boat on the Orca, which is the boat in the ship in the movie Jaws, and Quint, the person that is going to take this a person that's going to take this shark and knock it out of the water. He has a very long paragraph that he goes through, and I want to read that to you because I think that paragraph is fairly important, especially today, because it is very Memorial Day-ish, if you will. And you go through this, and it's an incredible paragraph. I want to read this to you. Because when we experience death, especially if we experience death in battle, in any way, shape, or form, whether it's, when we think battle, we always think of, it has to be death by guns or something like that, or I would say by metal is what I usually call it or refer to it as. But there are other ways. Listen to this paragraph. So they're on the boat and they're getting ready to really, really mess this fish up, right? Really, really destroy this fish. And here's how it goes. Yeah, the USS Indianapolis, June 29th, 1945. 3.5 minutes past midnight. 2 torpedoes from a Japanese submarine slammed into our side. 2 or 3. We was still under sealed orders after delivering the bomb, the Hiroshima bomb. We was going back across the Pacific from Tinian to Leyte. Damn near 1,100 men went over the side. Lifeboats was lashed down so tight to make the bomb run. We couldn't cut a single one adrift. Not one. And there was no rafts. None. The vessel sank in 12 minutes. Yes, that's all she took. We didn't see the first shark till we'd been in the water about an hour. A 13-footer near enough. A blue. You measure that by judging the dorsal to the tail. What we didn't know, of course, the captain knew. I guess some officers knew. Was the bomb mission had to be so secret, no distress signals was sent. What men didn't know was that they wouldn't even list us as overdue for a week. Well, I didn't know that. I wasn't an officer, just as well, perhaps. So some of us were dead already in the water, just hanging limp in our life jackets, and several already bleeding, and the 300 or so laying on the bottom of the ocean. As the light went, the sharks came cruising. We formed tight groups, somewhat like squares in an old battle. You know what I mean? So that when one come close, the men nearest would yell and shout and pound the water, and sometimes it worked and the fish turned away. But other times, that shark would seem to look right at a man, right into his eyes, and in spite of all that shouting and pounding, you'd hear that terrible high screaming, and the ocean would go red, then churn up as they ripped him. Then we'd reform our little squares. By the first dawn, the sharks had taken more than 100. Hard for me to count, but more than 100. I don't know how many sharks, maybe 1,000. I do know they averaged 6 men an hour, all kinds, blues, makos, all kinds. In the middle of the second day, some of us started to go crazy from thirst. One fellow cried out he saw a river. Another claimed he saw a waterfall. Some started to drink the ocean and choked on it. And some left our little groups, our little squares, and swam off all along looking for islands, and the sharks always took them right away. It was mainly the young fellows that did. The old ones stayed where they was. The second day, my life jacket rubbed me raw, and that was more blood in the water. Oh my. On Thursday morning, I bumped up against a friend of mine, Herbie Robinson from Cleveland. He buzzins me. It seemed he was asleep, but when I reached over to awaken him, he bobbed in the water, and I saw his body upend because he'd been bitten in half beneath the waist. Well, Chief, so it went on. Bombers high overhead, but nobody noticing us. Yes, suicides, sharks, and all this going crazy and dying of thirst. Noon the 5th day, Mr. Hooper. A lockhead Ventura swung around and came on in low. Yes, he did that. Yes, that pilot saw us, and early evening a big fat PBY came down out of the sky, began the pickup. That was when I was most frightened of all, while I was just waiting my turn. Just 2.5 hours short of 5 days, 5 nights, when they got to me and took me up. 1,100 of us went into that ocean. 316 got out. Yeah, 1945. June the 29th. Anyway, we delivered the bomb. When we hear a story like this, that is all about experiencing death. And that experience could be short term, okay? Or it could be long term. Short term, as in an event, or long term, as an experience. And we call this episodic. One of the things that we need to highlight about all of this is that, well, while it might be short-term or long-term, that's not it. It's the experience of it itself. That is it. To see the death of a loved one, and I think that when we talked about experiencing or notification, it isn't like we get a text in the notification, or we experience it as in like some sort of movie. It's something that we really go through. And I think that could be the hardest, especially when it's long term. Even in the case of, say, an Alzheimer's patient. Watching that person go from step to step to step to step, stage to stage to stage to stage, and seeing that person until one day you walk up to them and they look at you and they ask, "Who are you?" Knowing that their world is now, I believe, in part here and in part there. Quint's story in the movie Jaws is writing that we don't hear anymore. Today's movies, are so watered down compared to the motion pictures of ago. They're just so simple, right? I'm not saying, for the most part, I'm saying, every once in a while you get a good movie in there. You're like, wow, that's a really good movie. And this sort of thing, especially when in I guess older tribes, when individuals reached a certain age, there was sort of like a ritual suicide, if you will, when people would give themselves up to the gods, But either way, you still experienced it. And that's one way of understanding the loss. And the second way, obviously, is by getting notified by it, right? And when we're notified by it, I think it's important, because when we're notified, it's something that we know for a fact that, yes, it happened. And then sometimes, could we have even been there for that person during it? I want to read you guys a statement. And in the military, there's something called notification officers. Notification officers are individuals who would come up and present a triangularly folded flag to the family member of the deceased. And the notification goes something like this. The Commandant of the Marine Corps, I'm a former United States Marine, has entrusted me to express his deepest regret that your relationship, John, your husband, brother, son, daughter, wife, whatever, died or was killed in action in, and then the place of incident on the date. And then they would state the circumstances. And then it would be completed with the commandant extends his deepest sympathy for you and your family and your loss. I think that there are three statements here. The first is a statement of introduction. The second is a statement of appeal. It's an appeal to pity. And the third is comfort. And while that statement may seem cold, okay, it's definitely needed to begin that process of grief. Now, other phone calls might not go this way. Other phone calls might just call and be like, you know, so-and-so, you need to sit down. You know, when you hear those words, you need to sit down. And then you hear it. It is something that all of us, at least most of us, have experienced. And every single experience is different than the other. I see the Druids as people who may have gone to the family, especially if it was, say, a Celtic warrior. I see the Druids taking a role in that somehow, some way, to go up and notify in some way, shape, or form the family of the death. But I see some sort of connection there. Not a close one, but definitely one. And, you know, we could, we could go ahead and talk about these notifications or any way we experience it. But there is still a third way that death happens. Death happens by thinking about death often. Something before it even occurs. Now, I'm not talking about suicidal ideation. I'm not talking about homicidal ideation. I'm talking about a genuine thought that occurs and recurs in the mind when one sees their loved one at their deathbed. I'm not talking about prophecy here at all. I'm talking about that a relationship or a bond might be so strong that it can disturb one's peace of mind and not bring that health, happiness, and hope. And the distinguish is, I want to distinguish this also against death anxiety, the anxiety of one's own death, being anxious about one's own personal death, especially as they grow older or enter a situation where they know that the outcome will not be good, or even hearing, I don't even know if they do this anymore, but hearing they may only have and then X amount of time to live. I want to distinguish this from that. I call it, and I believe this could be it, but I'm not a clinician, so I don't know, necrophobia. And that is fear of dying, or fear of death, if you will. And it could exist in anyone, you know. People that have very strong bonds with another person. Especially knowing it's Memorial Day weekend, knowing that somebody's going off to war, knowing that somebody's going off to battle, not knowing if they're going to come home, seeing their death, thinking about it. And, you know, I think that it's relatively important to understand that all of this is death. Whether you experience it, whether you're notified by it, or whether you're already projecting it, you're experiencing that process of grief. And, I think that when we begin to understand that and know that and feel that, then I think we're able to know that there are basically a few things that we need to do to deal with this grief. Number one, you must, and I think this is it. I think this is the center circle of all the circles. Support. That you will need a support circle. Family, number one. And number two is friends. And number three is group. Support groups, that is. Knowing that your family might not necessarily have the words that they need to say, but you need to let them care. And letting your friends help you embrace the situation in ways they want to. And know that there is no other word that anyone will ever speak to you that will help you reach acceptance, that icing on the cake. Because all of this, you don't know what step of the directions or the instructions of making that cake, of which we talked about earlier, and the trophy being acceptance, the icing on the cake. You don't know whether you're at step 1, step 2, step 3. You don't know whether the cake's in the oven or whether or not you're just mixing the ingredients. Because it's all blah. And I think the last is so important. I think that the next is to really gain the help of a professional to help you go through that grief. And I don't see a problem with that. And sometimes, we might be in luck enough where that professional might be a family member, and we luck out that way. Other times we might have to go and get that counseling done. But I did come up with a 5-point plan of what I call cold hard facts that I think could knock a lot of this out. Number one, the first fact is that they will not return to this realm. They will not. And could it happen? Do we hear stories and folklore? Look at how long Lear grieved for his children. Were they dead? No. But were they kind of dead? Yeah. In a way, yeah. 900 years, right? The second is to find an anchor, but not dependence. Find an anchor, but not dependence. Find an anchor, but not dependence. What you don't want to do is allow yourself to be entangled in another situation, and that situation leads to sort of codependence. That's something you don't want to happen. And force yourself to optimal health. These next statements are more, I would say, Druidic, if you will, and I want to say that, you must face the fact that you did nothing wrong, that this was written by the god or gods of your understanding. I'll simply say it was written by the gods. And if you can aim your anger at any entity, try to avoid aiming your anger toward another human being. Aim your anger, if you will, to the fates, because they'll be very, very, very well endowed to handle your processing. And finally, embrace, I guess, your fear, but do not be afraid. And there's a difference. We can have fear, but we mustn't be afraid. I think it's incredibly natural to have fear. I hear a lot of people say, I feel fear nothing. No. You're afraid. You may not be afraid of anything, but but you fear. Fear is a human emotion. Fear is a human extraction. It's an extension of our own humanity. I want to say that as we move into this idea of knowing how to support another in dealing with their loss, I never know what to say. And so today I actually took a good hour to really think about what I could even say in the future to people that might work. There's so many things that I think are not really appropriate to say to someone. Especially, I know how you feel, and, because you don't. Because, like I said earlier, no one experiences an experience that another has experienced. Each experience is unique and distinct in its own, and of its own, and with its own. So I came up with 10 statements, and here they are. Number 1, for the person that you're trying to support, you can state, if you need something, call. That's it. Keep it simple. Number 2, I wish I had the right words. I'm here. Because we're using present statements, right? Keep it in the present. Keep it in the now. You're helping that person move into the present, and that's all part of the process. Number 3, I want to know how you feel. Let's talk soon. Now we're talking about that hope dimension, right? But more importantly, you're in my thoughts and prayers. And I hear this all the time. You're in my thoughts and prayers. Right? You're in my thoughts and prayers. It's something common, and it's something that I feel is very accurate and important. Because you are allowing the other person to know that part of you is experiencing it. There was a scene in Midsummer and the movie, and there was a scene in it where, as one is dying, right, or experiencing death and the pain of death, others begin to mimic the affect and effect of that pain. So if one is screaming, then the other is also screaming. Same. What's happening is one is putting theirself at the same frequency as the other, but knowing that one isn't actually the one experiencing the loss and the other one is, you're actually at a higher I guess tune than to help the other, bring them out. And while it might not take a second at a funeral of sorts, it is as I said, the beginning process. Too, another thing is my favorite memory of blank is and I thought about that. We're talking about memory, short term, long term. We're talking about those sorts of things, and I'm thinking, well, what memories do we have? Here's one that I came up with that I thought might be, you don't even have to use the word path. You could just say, I'm walking this with you. I'm walking beside you. I'm walking this path with you. I'm walking this path with you. And do so. You see, the next two are basically, give a facial expression. Sometimes words aren't enough. Just give a facial expression to the griever. And next would be to give a genuine hug to the griever. And a lot of people say, well, you know what? Should you cry? Should you show any sort of weakness? I don't believe it's weakness. I don't think it's weakness, but I do think that it wouldn't be harmful to cry along with the griever. I think that's an important part. It's as pagan as you would want to, probably, and closest to the old ways as possible. And also, something like in a way, I'm you don't want to say I'm always up for you. You don't want to say that, but I'm usually up early in the morning, or I'm usually up late at night. You don't even have to complete it with anything. I'm up in the morning and I'm up at night. Let them complete the phrase. It'll help them feel accomplished. We also put up a meme a while back, and I think it was two of these bubble cartoon characters, and there's no words, I don't think, being said, or I think it's can I help, and the other person is doing everything they can to push this other person away, so the one person knows that no matter what they do, what they say, they're going to just end up being not enough. And you're not going to be enough. But I also think that it's important to understand and realize that. At the end of the cartoon, one of the bubble creatures comes up to the other bubble creature and just sits with them. You can sit in silence. Fewer words help, especially in the beginning. You wouldn't want to tell a person who's, going through that grief, let's go out to the movie on the next day. I think that, you need to allow people to enjoy, and I don't mean enjoy in any sort of mean way. I mean enjoy in the sense of experience, right? Because this is and eventually will be a way to get that person stronger. Before I give the Foirceadal or the Druidic Mantra. Before I give that Foirceadal, I will. I want to recite what is called Article 1 of the Code of Conduct. I guess for those in the armed forces, and this is what it says. It says this: I'm an American fighting in the forces which guard my country and our way of life. I'm prepared to give my life in their defense. Because it's based on the idea of dying for something right, something just. When I was, after I left the clerical Catholic Church and moved into the religious Catholic Church, meaning moving from the clerics, the guys that dress up in the black and the Roman collar, and moved into what I believed something was more spiritual and deep, and moved into the Mercedarian friars. They taught us as novitiates that the last oath or vow that we make, would be death for the order. To die basically for what you believe in to be true. And I think that is so awesome when it comes out and pours out in this oath. Because this is an oath. This is a vow. Just like the Celts would have taken, just like the Vikings would have taken. And I think knowing that and thinking about that, we can now move into the Foirceadal. And here it is, your Druidic Mantra. I am strong enough. I am strong enough. I am strong enough to embrace. I am strong enough to embrace my grief. I'm strong enough to embrace my grief. I'm strong enough to embrace my grief. As I allow myself, strong enough to embrace my grief, as I allow myself to feel and heal. Strong enough to embrace my grief, as I allow myself to feel and heal. We always end Serene Sunday with Draiocht, or magic. And that's something that I do at the end because people who usually just come on for a little bit, I think that it's important for them to hear the whole thing before they go ahead and do the magic, because now they have the layout, now they have the foundation for the magic to actually begin to work. And this is not in any way, shape, or form to expedite the grieving process. Okay, that's not what this is about. This is about actually, I would even say too, on behalf of the supporter, or on behalf, or as the griever, this can be done by either. If it's done by the griever, it's going to be done by the griever. But if it's done by the supporter, who may be, a druid, I think that this could be something that would be incredibly powerful, druidic, and very magical in many ways. And you guys know we we are definitely an opponent definitely an opponent of atheism. But I would say too, because we are a faith-based community, but I would say too that this magic works regardless of how you believe or what you believe to be true, right? I don't. You could tell me all day long that you don't believe in the gods, but I could care less. The gods exist. I don't need to prove it to you. We have stories, we have folklore that have lasted forever to prove their existence. And while even I would say that our ancestors would have looked at the gods as their ancestors and their gods as their ancestors' ancestors, I would say that this is something that I think will be awesome. Draiocht for you. And the first step, you won't need your Draiocht for this. You won't need a batashul, but I think that you will want to benefit as the griever or the person supporting by tea lights with a color. The color that was the favorite color of the deceased, if you will. The one who passed into the other realm. The one who passed into, Asgard, or the one who passed into Tirnanag, or the one who passed into heaven, or whatever you want to call the other world. And to buy tea lights with the favorite color of the one whose body, that's why I always take your Druidic tetrachonomy and I separate it into two parts, one being the body and the other part being the heart, the soul, the mind, and the spirit, because only the body, the physical part, this part, the matter part, is gone. And you light the light, you light the tea light, and you light it for two reasons, and only these two reasons. Now, I know every religion has sort of ritual for this, in the Hebrew tradition, it is to light a candle 1 year after the person died. But I say this. I say that you would light this tea light with the color, the favorite color of the person. Okay, if a person loved red, then you do red. There's a connection there for some reason, right? Purple, green, white, whatever the favorite color was, brown. And you're going to light it when you feel you're at your weakest point. Because that tea light becomes that person. And second, when you wish to commune with that other person. I think that while it might be suggested that, well, during the class, then aren't you keeping them here? No. If anything, you know that the flames of Beltane, the flames and the fires at Beltane, if you will, that some would say, Beltane, the flames, the feeling of the burn, that purgatory, that state of baking that cake, that whole thing we talked about, this whole entire talk was going through Beltane, so that we light then that candle in honor of the one who has gone. And we light it when we feel we're at our weakest point, or when we wish to speak with, or commune with, or be in communication with the other, the one, the loved. Because then the love is truly the fire. Until one day, you no longer need to light it. And that last time that you do, that last tea light, you will always keep. You will always keep it with you. Because you know it is now the memory that you always wanted. That achievement that you always wanted. And what is that achievement? That achievement is acceptance. Now for your blessing. Okay. Wherever you're at, whenever you're at, this goes beyond time and space. May the gods bless you. May the goddesses keep you. May the Fae shine their light upon you, and may your ancestors remain with you forever and ever. Girawen. Thanks everybody for watching. Thanks for tuning in, even if it was for a little bit. Maybe you'll have time to play this back, and know that Memorial Day isn't just a day, it's a time frame. It's episodic and eternal at once. And knowing that, we can also understand that this is something that we truly, truly experience, even if another has not experienced it. I hope you use the tools that I've taught you. I hope you take what I've taught you and maybe incorporate it into your way, into your tradition. Doesn't necessarily have to be the tradition of the Druid Order, which is Druid Order of Blessed Stone and Wood, which is our religious order. It doesn't necessarily have to be that. But it is definitely something that I believe some of those things could help. Even if you've heard one thing. You know, when I taught, I always said, don't leave this classroom. If you leave this classroom and put your hand on the door and open it up and walk out and you don't feel like you've learned something new, then I have not done my job. As a Druid, I am now telling you, take what I've taught and go forth with that knowledge and be keepers of it and share it with others. And if you want to help in any way, shape, or form, like our YouTube channel, and I'm trying to get 1,000 likes, so I hope you have a wonderful weekend wherever you're at in your grieving process, share this. If you are in your grieving process, watch this again and listen to the kind words, the gentle words, the strong words, the words of courage and vision and wisdom. The Druid, the Druid, right? The Druid. And know that acceptance is the road to Draiocht. Ta se fior, ta se ior, Betshegobra, arni taste lemo gui. Druids would conclude with not blessed be, but they would respond with tasefor, sorry. And that is, be it thus. Be it thus. Thanks, everybody.